as we continue to get you reaction on the passing of Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu. We're joined now by ANC Veteran Mathews Phosa. Mr. Phosa, wonderful to talk to you this morning to reflect on the incredible life of the Arch. And we've been talking about him in the various settings that he found himself over the decades that he spent in activism, in the church, in politics in many ways, although many people will say he's not a political animal, Mr. Phosa. Your reflections this afternoon as we come to terms with the passing of the Arch.
Thank you, Michelle, for inviting me, and to your listeners and viewers, thank you very much. Well, I would like to join all South Africans in conveying condolences to Mama Leah, who is also the ambassador, one of the ambassadors for Special Olympics in South Africa. And to the children, Trevor and the siblings, condolences to all of you. We are at a point where I think the last icon of our liberation struggle has passed on, but the struggle must continue. I interacted with Bishop Tutu many years ago, long before I went to exile, when he was Secretary General of the South African Council of Churches, in political cases which ensure that we are supported and that political activists are well represented by proper attorneys and advocates. Political inquests, like the one of Tembo Yuse, Mgawe, and Steve Biko, he always stood behind the efforts to ensure that we unearth the truth about what would have happened in the prisons when those prisoners died mysteriously. There were cases of forced removals in this country, and Bishop Tutu led the campaign against forced removals of people. I think of the area of the Dachakral and Driefontein, where the late Solomon Keith was leading resistance. And I remember Bishop Tutu coming to Nelspruit, and I went to fetch him at the airport. And we're driving to Methodist Church to pray, not only for the Dachakral people, but also at the time for the Gangwani people who were facing the threat of losing their South African citizenship when they were about to be forced to become part of Swaziland. Bishop Tutu joined the campaign against these forced removals and attempts by people who wanted to make the Swaziland lose their citizenship. And I remember we're driving for the airport, and he asked me about a big orchard, Crocodile Valley Estate. He said, to whom does it belong? I said, to a certain Mr. Solomon. He said, alone? I said, yes. He said, this is obscene ownership. I mean, that showed you his values in terms of how land should be owned in this country. Bishop Tutu, when we came back from exile, we worked with him in the TRC. I was one of those in the ANC group who drafted the submissions, the ultimate submission of the ANC to the TRC. And we interacted very strongly throughout the hearings of the TRC. There's a lot of fallout that happened there. I remember we argued about whether one could equate freedom fighters with the apartheid killers. And I took the point that we could not equate them. And he didn't think I was justified to pronounce on that matter, that it was his purview to pronounce as the hearings were going on. But those are some of the interactions. Bishop Tutu was a fierce fighter against apartheid, but later a fierce fighter against corruption. He was not afraid to face the challenges of the time, and he faced them. He felt that we were betraying the promise of a better life for our people, and he stood up against the ANC government as he did against the apartheid government. Bishop Tutu would wish us to continue with the struggle from where we are and pick up the baton.
Mr. Phosa, you talk about, the fact that he was a fierce fighter against apartheid, and in fact, in his later years, he felt he had no choice. He became a fierce fighter against what the ANC had become. In fact, he went as far as to say that he was praying for the downfall of the ANC government.
Don't blame him, because he was outraged, like all of us are still outraged by corruption. I mean, I was the first person to call on leaders who are corrupt to step aside, to stand down. And so I totally align with him. It's not for me to determine what the voters of this country will decide, and not even for Bishop Tutu, but for the voters to decide. But the way things are going, it looks like, the people are speaking in a manner which shows they've lost confidence in government and parties.
Mr. Phosa, you've talked a lot about the Arch in his capacity as an activist, and of course you worked very closely with him, as you say, at the TRC. But were there moments when you and the Arch, outside of the important work that you were doing, when you were able to have a personal interaction with him that sticks out for you today?
Yes, Arch was like a father to us. I mean, we worked very closely all the time. I remember there was a big issue, and I don't think it's been recorded anywhere, where P.W. Botha was refusing to go to the TRC, and we all know he died without going to the TRC. But there was a moment where I was asked by the leadership of the ANC to try and mediate that. And I had a discussion with Bishop Tutu about this, and also with P.W. Botha, and I will say it today publicly. The idea here was that the two must meet. And Bishop Tutu said to me, "Do you think you'll meet me?" I said, "Yes, I think he'll meet you. I've talked to him, but he wants you at his house." Until today, it's not known what happened, but Bishop Tutu did go to his house, and they had a discussion where Bishop Tutu was asking the questions he wanted to ask him.
Yeah, just incredible. Mathews Phosa, let me thank you for your time this morning. Thank you so much for speaking to us here on the AM Report, telling us more about the Arch as an activist, and also the work that he did, of course, as someone who was in charge of the TRC.